What's up, guys? Welcome back to Life Groups. Tonight we'll be starting a new series called Critical Questions. In this series, we'll examine 3 of the most common questions asked by skeptics of Christianity. So to start us off, we'll answer the question, is creation true? Meaning, is the creation account given in the book of Genesis true? And what about evolution and carbon dating and other scientific claims? Are they compatible with Christianity? So before we go any further, answer a few questions with your group. So let's get right to the point. What are the scientific reasons that people give for not believing the Bible's creation account? And how should we think about these claims? The first is scientific dating methods. Carbon dating, radiometric dating, dendrochronology, the list goes on and on. When these dating methods are employed by scientists, they generally conclude that the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. But if we take the days of Genesis literally, it would point to the Earth being roughly 8,000 years old. That's a pretty big difference. So as Christians, what can we say to this? Well, here are a few quick points to consider. Number 1, modern dating methods for the Earth assume consistency based on the current natural processes. In other words, it doesn't factor in the possibility that cataclysmic events or varied atmosphere could potentially age the Earth much faster than the current rate. Number 2, modern dating methods at best can only ever tell us how old the Earth appears to be, but they cannot tell us how old the Earth actually is. Here's what I mean. God could have created the Earth and everything in it instantly, but with the appearance of age. Take, for example, the creation of man and woman. God did not create them as embryos. He created them as man and woman. Now, if a scientist examined them at creation, he would have concluded that they had been alive for many years, certainly not minutes or days old. So it's perfectly reasonable to believe that God could have done this with everything else. After all, Jesus himself turned water into wine. And if you know anything about wine, you know that wine needs to age in order to be wine. But Jesus created it instantly, with the appearance of age. These 2 things alone shed doubt on the assertion that modern dating methods disprove the Bible. But what about evolution? Evolutionary theory says that biological variations can lead to significant biological changes due to genetic drift and natural selection. Essentially, small changes can lead to big changes. Now, almost all people affirm this as being true, but the degree to which it is true is debated. Microevolution is the term used to describe adaptations within species. Birds, over time, may develop a differently formed beak. However, according to many evolutionary theorists, there is evidence to suggest that these changes can evolve one species into another. This we call macroevolution. That perhaps everything in existence did not just appear one day, but started at a microscopic level and slowly evolved over billions of years. But this seems to go directly against what the Bible teaches us in Genesis 1 about the world and everything in it that was made. As Christians, how should we think about this conundrum? Is evolution true and the Bible false? Or is the Bible true and evolution false? Or is there a way to reconcile the two? Now, I want to make this really clear. In either an evolutionary perspective or a literal creation perspective, you are putting faith in something that you cannot prove. You have to weigh both the science and the theology. So let's start with the science. Here are two reasons that we should be skeptical about the science of macroevolutionary theory. Number one, macroevolution explains the origin of species, not the origin of life. You can only go so far back before there has to be a creation. You're just kicking the can down the road. Life can't originate from non-life, and there's no scientific evidence to prove otherwise. Number two, there is a significant lack of transitional fossils between species. And genetic mutations seem to form too slowly to give any real advantage, especially when it comes to transitioning from one species into another. For example, a nub of a wing is of no advantage. There's no reason for that species to continue to have nubs of wings that grow and grow until they become wings. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Well, isn't there another option? Isn't there a middle ground? A way to reconcile the age of the earth or evolution with the Bible? Well, I'll briefly address this point after a pause for a few more questions with your group. As I mentioned, some Christians may claim that parts of Genesis, especially the creation account, should not be interpreted literally. Perhaps the days of Genesis are really just periods of time that really take place over millions and billions of years. Perhaps God even used the evolutionary process to bring about Adam and Eve. And I will admit, these are good points worth considering, and there are some strong Christians who hold to either or both of them. However, I want to give us one additional point to consider before affirming those ideas. If life existed for millions or billions of years before Adam and Eve, the theological concept of death drastically changes in the Bible. Here's what I mean. Romans 5:12 says that death spread to all men because all sinned. Although spiritual death is certainly affirmed throughout Scripture, passages like these in Romans have historically been interpreted as literal physical death. Adam sinned, an actual man, so now there is physical death in the world. And this is why Christ's physical resurrection is such good news. As Romans 6 makes clear only a few verses later. Christ's death, an actual man, was physical, and his resurrection was physical. He suffered the consequences of sin spiritually and physically to give us the consequences of righteousness spiritually and physically. However, if macroevolution were true, or life existed for an extended period of time before Adam and Eve, death would have existed long before men and women. The concept of natural selection is death. You don't have evolution without death. And therefore, we must change the historical interpretation of verses like those in Romans and the historical theology of physical death as a natural consequence of sin. Now, perhaps you've done your research and that's okay with you. But for me, the theology makes too much sense the way it has always historically been interpreted. And the science behind scientific dating methods and macroevolution too shaky for me to conclude that the creation account in Genesis is simply metaphorical. So what do you think? What are some things that we haven't mentioned that are important to consider? What questions do you have? You can text them anonymously to us at the number in the bottom of the screen, and we would love to help you work through those. But with all of this, there's one thing that we must agree on. And that is that the explanation of the origin of life given in the Bible is the best way for us to understand our world and ourselves. There is a reason God told it to us like he did. It gives us purpose and meaning. And I pray that even as you wrestle with understanding it, you will find great hope in it. Have a great night, guys, and we'll see you again next time.